The world was not silent. That was the lie they told themselves. It was a world of echoes, of whispers in the dark, of the rustling of things unseen. The silence they sought was a fragile shield, a thin membrane against the horrors that stalked the ravaged earth. For Alex Taylor, a young college student, this reality was a cruel and constant companion. Her world had been shattered, reduced to a desperate dance between life and the monstrous creatures that hunted by sound. The ranch house loomed before them like a skeletal beast against the bruised twilight. Alex's breath hitched, the familiar tightness in her chest a grim reminder of her asthma, a weakness in this world of brutal survival. Martin, her boyfriend, reached for her hand, his touch a brief spark of warmth in the encroaching cold. "Just a quick supply run, Alex," he murmured, his voice tight with a hope that seemed almost naive in this desolate landscape. The air hung heavy, thick with the stench of decay. It clung to everything, a reminder of the death that had washed over the world, leaving only the bones of civilization behind. They moved cautiously, their footsteps measured, each movement a risk. The ranch house was silent, too silent, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. Inside, they found cans of food, their labels peeling and faded, and medical supplies that could only offer temporary relief. Alex's stomach churned. Nausea, which she had been experiencing the past week, seized her, her knees almost buckling. "I don't feel good," Alex whispered, clutching her stomach. Martin guided her to a dusty table, concern etched on his young face. She found a pregnancy test kit buried beneath some gauze and immediately knew, deep in her heart, what it would say. The result was positive, a cruel twist of fate in a world where the future was a luxury they could not afford. She was pregnant, carrying a life in a world that had become a charnel house. The weight of this realization crashed down upon her, the joy replaced by a hollow ache, a grim understanding of the impossible choices she faced. They spent a restless night in the ranch house, their dreams haunted by the clicking, chitinous sounds that stalked the shadows beyond their makeshift barricade. Sleep offered no escape, only a brief respite before the relentless terror returned with the morning. They had to leave, had to return to the small hospital where they took shelter, where a semblance of order still persisted. But as they made their way back across the overgrown field, Alex's foot became ensnared in a gnarled log. She gasped, her heart leaping into her throat as she struggled. "Run, Alex!" Martin yelled, his voice cracking, a frantic desperation in his eyes. He knew what would come if they lingered. He saw movement in the distance, like shadows coming to life, and he knew. As Alex pulled and struggled, she saw a creature lurch into view, its grotesque form silhouetted against the pale sky. It was not the familiar, screeching alien, but something much, much more terrifying and alien. It was bigger, more agile, and it had a different look about it. It radiated malevolence, like a nightmare-given form. Martin shoved her towards the tree line, and with a cry of anguish and rage, he ran towards the creature. The monstrous entity turned its attention from Alex to Martin, its unblinking eyes locked on its new prey. As Alex fled into the woods, she could hear Martin's desperate screams cut short. A choked gurgle, then silence. A silence that was far more terrifying than any scream. The hospital of lost souls. The walk back to the hospital felt like an eternity, each step a heavy weight. She arrived, her mind fractured, her body trembling, her breath ragged. Her father, Kenneth, a man whose face was etched with worry, rushed to her side. She could not bring herself to tell him what happened to Martin, not yet. She spoke of the pregnancy, though, her voice barely a whisper. She was carrying Martin's child, and it was a burden she had no idea how to bear. Kenneth, despite his worry, offered his support, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. He promised to help, to get her and the baby to safety. Their plans were cut short. The news of her pregnancy, a secret whispered among the survivors, reached Martin's mother, Laura, a woman consumed by grief and twisted with bitterness. Laura, blaming Alex for Martin's death, locked her in a small room within the hospital. The room was small and windowless, the walls closing in. Alex clawed at the door, desperation rising within her. A primal fear began to stir, the realization that she was a prisoner, not of the creatures outside, but of the people she had sought safety with. With the help of her father, she escaped, her heart pounding in her chest. Kenneth had managed to pick the lock, and they fled. But Laura, in her anger, had attracted the aliens, her shouts of rage piercing the fragile silence. The hospital, once a sanctuary, became a hunting ground. Screams echoed through the hallways, mixed with the creatures' terrifying clicks and screeches. They fled, the hospital dissolving into chaos behind them. They could not stay and had to seek refuge elsewhere. The air was thick with the smell of fear, the world a symphony of death. The abandoned camp and the whispering radio. They found an abandoned camp, a place of broken tents and forgotten dreams. The camp had been ransacked. It was clear someone else had taken refuge here not too long ago. They set up a perimeter and made it as safe as they could. It was in this desolate place that they found a damaged radio, its wires frayed, its purpose seemingly lost. But Alex, with her quick mind, began to repair it, scavenging for the parts they needed. The radio, once silent, coughed back to life, spitting out static before a voice cut through the noise, a beacon in the dark. It spoke of an island, a place untouched by the creatures, a place of sanctuary. It spoke of the aliens' inability to swim, a weakness that could be exploited. It was a glimmer of hope, a path to survival. But then the reality of the situation struck home. It would be hard to get to the coast, and harder still to find a boat. They had to move carefully. Laura, driven by a vengeful rage, found them at the camp. She held Kenneth hostage, her eyes blazing with hate, demanding to know where Alex was. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. A struggle ensued. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty camp, and Kenneth fell to the ground, a dark stain blooming on his chest. Laura, shocked by her own violence, stared at the lifeless form. Alex, her heart shattered, fled. Laura had taken the only family she had left. She sought shelter under a waterfall, the cold water a stark contrast to the burning grief within her. It offered some concealment, some solace. She spent the night huddled there, her body shivering, but her mind resolved. She could no longer rely on anyone. She was alone, pregnant, and hunted. She had to make her own way. The fire station and the lighthouse. The next day, Alex made her way to town, her resolve hardened by grief and desperation. The town was a ghost of its former self, buildings scarred, streets littered with debris. It was clear that there had been a massive evacuation, and in the chaos, things had been left behind. But there were still remnants of humanity, of things worth salvaging, if she could just get to them. She had to get to the boat that she had heard was still there, waiting in a nearby fire station. She entered the fire station, her senses on high alert. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of smoke and damp. It was silent save for the dripping of water. Alex found a boat, its hull gleaming under the dim light, a vessel of hope in this sea of despair. She started the engine, a cough followed by the low thrum that made her heart leap. But then she noticed that some of the fuses were missing. She found the fuse box and set to work, carefully putting in each one. She hadn't realized how long she had been doing this until she felt a searing pain run through her arm, and she realized that a frayed wire had touched her. An electrical short had caused a fire to break out, flames licking at the walls, smoke billowing into the air. She gasped, her lungs burning, her vision blurring. The smoke overwhelmed her, and she collapsed to the floor. She awoke to the sound of coughing. Her vision slowly cleared, and through the smoke, she could see Laura dragging her. Alex couldn't believe it. Why would Laura help her, after everything that happened? But Laura didn't say anything as she helped Alex. Laura forced a gas mask onto Alex's face, and using her hands, she gestured for Alex to get to the boat. Laura then ran towards the nearby lighthouse. Alex managed to get to the boat. She wasn't sure why Laura had saved her, but she wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. As she started the engine, she could see the light flickering on at the lighthouse, an enormous light that would distract the creatures. A huge risk for Laura, but she knew it had to be done. Laura was drawing the creatures away from the town, making Alex's escape possible. She sailed into the dark sea, the lighthouse her only guide. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Alex took a full breath. The island was her only hope. As the dawn broke, she heard a voice crackle across the radio, a desperate plea for any survivors. She responded, her voice trembling with hope and fear. "I'm alive," she said. But she knew she was far from safe. She was alone, pregnant, and hunted by creatures beyond comprehension. The island was her destination, but the journey was only beginning. The silence was not a comfort. It was the sound of the unknown, the sound of unseen horrors waiting in the darkness. And as she sailed towards the horizon, she knew that her story, a horror story of survival, was far from over. This story uses the A Quiet Place, the road ahead material as an outline. Emphasis on psychological horror. The story delves into the mental and emotional toll of the apocalypse on Alex, emphasizing her fear, desperation, and the psychological impact of loss and betrayal. Enhanced descriptions. The creatures are described with more detail, emphasizing their terrifying nature and the sense of unease they evoke. Themes of isolation and survival. The narrative focuses on Alex's increasing isolation and her struggle to survive in a hostile world, highlighting the dark choices she faces. Character depth. Characters like Laura and Kenneth are given more nuanced motivations, making their actions more complex. Atmospheric tension. The story uses sensory details, sounds, smells, sights to create a sense of unease and impending doom. Expanded narrative. The bare bones of the source material has been fleshed out with added scenes, dialogue, and internal monologues to build a comprehensive story. Added horror elements. Elements such as the description of a terrifying, unknown creature, the desperation and brutality of the other survivors, and the constant threat of being discovered add the horror genre elements to the story. Internal conflict. Alex grapples with the emotional burden of her pregnancy in a post-apocalyptic world, making her journey even more perilous. Moral ambiguity. Laura's actions are portrayed with moral ambiguity, adding a layer of complexity to the characters. Paced storytelling. The story balances fast-paced action with moments of quiet horror, maintaining tension. The narrator aims to create a suspenseful and chilling story by making the world around Alex seem dangerous and making her experiences seem both terrifying and isolating.